everybody. Welcome back to a very special edition of the Innovation Storyteller Show. It would be an understatement to say that I am excited about having my co-host on this program. Peter Temes has been one of my intellectual mentors in the world of innovation, and I am so grateful that we are going to be doing a very special series around topics that matter most to the innovation community. Things like trust, things like moonshots, things like what is it like to actually become a chief innovation officer or to hire a chief innovation officer? The really big ideas that are impacting innovation today, both at our heads and our hearts and our guts. And so I'm very grateful to have Peter Temes join me today in this mission, because the Institute for Innovation at Large Organizations is one of the benchmarking organizations in the field of innovation. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter to share a little bit more about his journey and his mission and how all of this came to be. So Peter, share with my incredible audience of innovators and folks who have an innovation mandate in their job description. Tell us a little bit about you and the ILO that so many people in the world of innovation have come to love and depend on for reliable information about what works and what doesn't in innovation.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this project with you. And I say that in part because you've been an important part of the ILO community, and the work that you do with innovation storytellers has been so resonant and so valuable for other folks in the group. So what we are is a membership organization that I began literally 20 years ago. I left a higher education leadership role to jump into this, partly because I was part of a large organization that made one or two really fatal mistakes, even though we had some of the most talented people in the world who were authentically, positively engaged and only trying to do good things. And I was just a witness to this decision-making process that drove that organization into a brick wall. And really, how do these terrific large organizations get things wrong and stay committed to the wrong path at times? That's question number one.
Oof, wow. Yeah.
Question number two was, how do they do a perfectly reasonable job at what they've been doing, but miss the enormous open door to do more, to serve people better and at greater scale? Why and how do those things happen? So I've now had 20 years spending incredible, rewarding time around essentially a seminar table, typically with 15 to 20 people, 30, 40, 50 times a year, with these folks who are in charge in some way of innovation in large organizations, to ask these questions, to talk with them about what they know and what they need to know, and then to execute research on their behalf. And there is a lot that we found. I always like to put that in two buckets. There are two or three enduring, unchanging, and not obvious best practices for doing and leading innovation in large organizations. And they haven't changed in 20 years. And then there's all the rest of the stuff, which has changed very dramatically. So we've been learning about that and feeding that back into the community, working with folks like NASA, IBM, Microsoft, Twilio, Bayer, Telecom Austria, British Air. We try very hard to curate the 50 or so folks in the membership, and we limit it to 50. We want them to represent every industry in the North American and European geography. The variety of different perspectives in the room add a lot of value. One thing that we realized from the early days was that blind spots tend to develop specifically to your industry and specifically to your function. So a CFO from an aviation company has a habit of not seeing some very specific things, while the chief innovation officer or the head of R&D for consumer goods companies will actually be able to help that person see what they're missing while having the same impact on their own blind spots. And we've seen a lot of magic like that happen over time.
Yeah. So wait, Peter, don't leave us in suspense. What are these two big things that everybody needs to know and that's been immutable in the world of innovation?
So the number one, and if you've been part of our community for a few years, you may already be tired of hearing me say it, The number one best practice for innovation in large organizations is to systematically lower the cost of failure for any new ventures or any changes you're imposing. And it's very simple. There are 4 legs to that stool. You have to lower the cost of failure in terms of time and in terms of money. And people don't tend to argue about that very much anymore. But also in terms of your brand reputation and customer relationship, and in terms of the potential political cost to folks in the middle of your organization who might opt in to support something new, but stand back and say, I can't help because I was associated with something that failed last year and it's already weighing me down.
Or I got 2 years to retirement and I don't really want to risk it.
Absolutely. Although sometimes those folks are the bravest if they feel real security, right?
Yeah.
Very senior people who are close to retirement can sometimes become the real hidden champion. And there's a lot more to unpack about that.
Yeah.
But when we hear people saying, we still do once in a while, we need you to help us with this big go-to-market thing for this new venture or this change in the way we work. But we have to do a lot of planning because failure is not an option. The only thing we can say is, okay, maybe you don't want our advice and the community conversation we have, because that's one of those areas where we actually kind of know in advance it's the wrong approach. When you're very planning right and you slow down the processes, you have relatively little advantage. You are poor at predicting. Think of an iceberg. All the brilliant folks trying to understand everything about the dynamic of this change in this launch, they're seeing the part of the iceberg that's above the water. And then you have this enormous base we will only discover through experiment.
Right.
So you're telling me, yeah, go ahead.
So that's number one, right? Is reduce the cost of failure, whatever that may be. And what's the other big secret?
The other big one, which we only really kind of sorted out and documented a few years ago, is this idea of efficiency versus discovery. So most large organizations are oriented either toward efficiency or toward discovery, and almost all of them are oriented toward efficiency. Most functions inside a large organization are also oriented either more toward efficiency or discovery, and almost all of them toward efficiency. So we've seen plenty of brave CEOs and others often bring in someone from the outside or elevate an oddball from the inside and say, hey, we're going to do an innovation thing. And we're going to give you money. We're going to give you some people. And we're going to give you the room you need to make this happen. And then you get in that seat, and I've been in this role, and week 1 or month 1, you get a call from the CFO's office. And someone says, hey, Bob wants to schedule your weekly, hourly review of all your group's expenses just to make sure we're in line with everything. What's really happening is you've been hired with a discovery mandate, but you're being managed with an efficiency mandate. And you see the repeatable activities, and here's a great real-world example. You see them being absolutely the opposite. So if you're being judged by the efficiency scorecard, it looks like you are failing and acting irresponsibly if you're doing discovery work. So take the example of COVID. COVID emerges rapidly. If you're the post office, if you're Starbucks, if you're Pfizer, you are faced with novel, unpredictable circumstances that you have not already tested over the many years you've been in business. So now you have to say, okay, who's in charge of this? You could say, well, let's put the most likely group to succeed in charge of it, and maybe they won't succeed with devastating results. Or, and this is what many of the better companies did, they said, okay, here's a mandate, and we're already doing this thing without preparation or skill. Let's mobilize every team in a certain area or a certain level and have them duplicate the work, because it has to get done. You're going to learn so fast because you're going to have one of these beautiful lower level best practices, multiple parallel teams trying to do the same thing. Now, if you're efficiency oriented, multiple parallel teams trying to do the same thing is incredibly wasteful. If there are already known best practices, you want the strongest, sharpest, most appropriate team to just do what you know works and to kill it with efficiency. And that makes perfect sense. In the case of COVID, we're trying to solve something unexpected, something new. We don't know who among our X thousand people are best at it. The best thing we can do is go real fast and try to figure out who makes the most good things happen. And you'll see, gosh, we thought it would be our safety team that was best at managing incidents that are happening in our 12,000 retail locations that we really want to keep open. It turned out it was our HR team, because they had a different kind of approach. They had existing relationships, and they were seeing more through the lens of people rather than through the lens of regulatory compliance, right? So that's just one example, but you can't predict where that's going to be in that intense moment. So you're doing things that are very discovery-oriented. They're delivering enormous discovery value, but very little efficiency value, and that's okay.
Right. As long as all the cards are on the table and everybody gets how we're doing it. And by the way, the bill might be a little higher this month, Mr. CFO, because we're deploying all teams to do this discovery.
That's right. But wait till you see the bill if we don't do it.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. And the chief innovation officer is going to be out the door with his team and the money and et cetera, right? Because they didn't prove the mandate. It's like asking a fish to ride a bicycle.
I think that's right. And think about winners and losers from different elements of the changed landscape during COVID. One loser, I think, is Cisco. Cisco was like the hottest network gear provider 25 years ago, blowing up like a rocket ship. How did Zoom steal their business? I mean, they made multi-billion-dollar bets on video conferencing.
Right. And WebEx and Skype and so many others, right?
I think,
figure it out.
I think WebEx is a Cisco offering.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and they've got several brands because they've also built that business by acquisition. The problem is they thought they had efficiency. They thought they knew how to do this. And they didn't recognize that the landscape had changed in ways they were not already adapted to begin with. So with good corporate discipline, they did more. They increased capacity, but not enough of the other variables in pushing their offer into the market. Zoom, in the same way that you could be a digital native, Zoom was the virtual meeting native. They weren't good at anything else yet.
That's right.
Distracted them.
Right. They were good at turning your profile picture into a cat in the middle of the pandemic if your kids had at your Zoom for their art class right before a big hearing.
Yeah.
Court hearing.
And it's interesting because you're pointing to something that's actually really poignant, which is to say they made some mistakes in the market and they had to learn lessons hard in terms of how to fix those mistakes. But by being able to fix those mistakes cheaply and quickly, they really limited their impact.
Right.
By having little or no brand visibility before the pandemic, they had a lower cost of failure in terms of things that might hurt their brand or customer relationships. But if you look at the impact of those first two criteria for lowering the cost of failure, they made that third one lower, even though it was real and it was there.
And yet now Zoom stock is in the toilet, right? It's really struggling as Teams has kind of fought back with a vengeance and said, we'll take you, we'll see you, Zoom, and then we'll integrate with every other Microsoft offering and put a layer of AI on top of it. And good luck, small fry.
Zoom became the incumbent really fast.
Right. They knocked out Blue Jean, right? And other startups that were trying to do that too.
Yeah. And part of what that illustrates is the adaptability of the clean sheet of paper, right? Zoom was so successful doing something that was all kind of built on the fly, on a reasonable starting point base that they worked out for a couple of years. But they became so successful very quickly. They kind of tied on the lead weights of incumbency as they should have been iterating more, probably doing a little more M&A.
But they were just trying to scale, right? So many users. And just, amazing.
Story's not over yet. If you look at Netscape, which owned the browser.
Wait, sorry, for our 25-year-old listeners, what's that again? A Netscape?
Yeah, Netscape is like Safari before Safari, or Opera before Opera, or Microsoft.
Opera.
Now
We're really dating ourselves.
But it was the dominant web browser all of a sudden. Interesting back history to that coming out of Mark Andreessen's research as an undergrad at the University of Illinois, which created Mosaic. And I could share some case studies of other lessons from that evolution. But what happened with Netscape is they began going crazy, attracting a lot of capital. They went public very early and took in yet more capital, and there was an almost unlimited appetite for what they had. They started doing the business model innovation experimentation to understand how to monetize that, and they actually did that pretty well. And then Microsoft woke up and started building the Netscape killer. Two very interesting things had happened earlier. One,
And by that, you mean Internet Explorer, am I right? Just to finish that sentence.
Yes, what became Internet Explorer.
Mm-hmm.
But even before that, one of the first things that happened as Netscape kind of built share and became a very valuable platform, in a medium, in an era when there had been no valuable platforms like that before, the users who built upon the platform, and think about this as a value chain going from platform up to incredible customer closeness. They became a platform.
We didn't even really know that term, platform.
Exactly.
Build upon it. Like, it's so ubiquitous. But that was the whole concept of, I remember as a publicist trying to explain what a platform was to a journalist in a software context. It was really challenging just to even get that across.
Yeah, and platform companies tend to be good at platforms. And there are ways to add up the value chain. There are ways to acquire, there are ways to go organically, where the platform has the appropriate P&L per platform, the right optimization, the right really big investment in engineering and tech to keep it doing all the new things it has to keep doing just to stay in play. Netscape very quickly tried to build kind of a media brand on top of it, which was only modestly successful because they were the first. And then when really good media brand players and developers came in, they kind of knocked them out. And interestingly, Yahoo was one of the first. And I was in the room once with the CEO of Netscape in its early days. And he was asked, what's the biggest mistake he made in the last 2 years? He said, not buying Yahoo. Jerry Yang literally brought Yahoo to our conference room. They didn't have a place for these 7 people to get together. So they were in the one conference room at Netscape, once Netscape rented a decent office in the Valley. And Jerry and his partner basically said, this is getting harder than we thought it would be. Why don't you give us $1 million and we'll give it to you and continue to work it? They passed because they were focused on creating their own channel, ad plus, click-through stuff. And for whatever reason, not because they did great planning, but because they did great, fast experimenting, Yahoo got there faster and bigger, and Netscape missed it.
Yeah. So these are incredible lessons, right, around these two things, right, about how we actually look at risk, right, which could literally walk into your conference room.
Yeah,
the disruptor in the room, right?
And I'll tell you, one of the phrases that we hate is de-risking, because de-risking generally means we can't fail. And we're not going to do this in a serious way. We're not going to begin to try to scale this until we know it will succeed, without necessarily going to that deeper level. I mean, you could use de-risking to say, well, in our company, de-risking means we're going to try lots of things fast, but we're going to make sure they don't hurt us when they don't work. But we don't hear that. We hear the word de-risking meaning, let's not get engaged until others have tried this and we can learn from their failures. That's actually smart. Learning from failures within an ecosystem you're part of, but where you don't pay the bill for that failure, is a great way to lower the cost of failing, if you have an external partner who does it for you. And there are a lot of examples, especially this idea of the corporate accelerator. And that deserves a show in its own right.
Oh, yeah, we're going to do that. We're definitely going to do that.
Yeah. And accelerators are funny because folks often start going to the accelerator business and spending maybe $2 million if they're really going to do it right, without fully clarifying why they're doing it, other than the fact that everybody else is doing it. But we found that to be the most effective way to do business model innovation, experimentation, with a very low cost of failure. And that's one of the only really good tools to be able to do parallel, in-market, rapid business model experimentation that have a very low cost of failure in terms of brand and customer reputation. And I can tell you, we did some work advising HSBC around a future of money accelerator, where you look at them, you look at Brown Brothers Harriman, you look at these other old traditional banks that have very big treasury functions. And the last thing the Sultan of Dubai wants from a place where he's put $100 billion to keep it safe, he doesn't want them to be innovative. He wants them to be old-fashioned perimeter security, stewardship. And yet, we heard folks from HSBC say 7 years ago, we know our margin is falling dramatically for most of our core services. right? Remember, they used to do a lot of securities brokerage, and they got paid a percentage or a fee per transaction. But not like a 99-cent fee per transaction, like a $99 fee. Or if you're trading a lot, like a $90,000 fee as you're moving a giant block of stock from here to there. That's gone. There's no margin in it for them. So they said, we know AI and other new technologies, and this is them talking 7 years ago, will be contributing $1 billion to our business, but we don't know how, we don't know the business model. And yet we can't shop 3 different things to our key customers to see if they like them, because we'll erode trust if they see us doing new things that they don't like. The accelerator gave them the chance to take a dozen startups, a couple of which were coming from their own internal labs and smart people, a couple of which came from the supply chain, but most were genuine independent startups. Put them in a room for 90 days, help those people learn about what real big time banking is, share some data that has to stay within the firm, expose them to how execs at a big bank think about the same issues, and expose them to some real customers. So the customer comes in for the tour and hears pitches from these places and then walks out with their highly paid customer satisfaction rep from the big bank. And the customers would say things like, it's so cool that I could interact with these crazy new businesses. We're so glad that it's not you, because they make us nervous, but it's not you. These are completely different brands. The crowd will say it's not us. But then they'll say something like, 11 out of those 10 just make me pull my hair out. But there was that one that maybe can help me solve a problem. And then you see that trend and you're like, okay, great. We have now done real in-market business model experimentation, and we externalize the cost of failure to these other branded startups. And that one is something that we can buy or hire that crowd or try to go and duplicate. But we now have insight that you can only get if you're very cognizant of this approach to lowering the cost.
It's fascinating, right? Because we look at those points 1 and 2, right? About thinking about de-risking, which we know is impossible, right? We just have to assume certain risks. Even pursuing and choosing a direction is risk, right? Because we're ultimately, I remember being in a mastermind group and realizing that the word decide comes from the same root word as suicide, homicide, etc., right? Fratricide, you might be killing your brother organization. It's cutting off, right? It's murdering another option.
Yeah.
And so when you decide on a strategy, it's just that.
That's right. And look, if you wake up in the morning and you've been taught when you get to the corner, always turn right, turning left is a risk. But if you're going to avoid the risk of failure completely, you'll never know what's down there.
Right. And you probably won't be around much longer. Right.
Well, at a certain point, the cool stuff is going to migrate from being on the right side of the street to the left side of the street or not. So how do you discover that? And think about it. You can say, well, I'm going to try to externalize this. You say to your little sister, hey, why don't you go down that block and tell me what you see? So now she's...
That's what startups are for. Is that right?
That's right.
You go try it. You go try it. Maybe we'll buy you.
You wrap up a delicious ham sandwich and you throw it down. It's like, go ahead. But you can also do things like get a couple of buddies with you and we'll go together. So we'll distribute the risk across the group, right? Which has really powerful scaling because everybody wants to jump on and rob the one person. And it's not that only half as many want to do 2 and then half as many again want to do 3. It's actually much lower because no one crazy individual wants to jump on 3 people at the same time. So you find these kind of dynamic solutions and then you start probing. And what happens is when you're doing that and the other guys aren't, because they feel they can't tolerate failure because they haven't systematically lowered the cost of failure, they're all turning. And you start creating some of this open water opportunity by beginning to learn what's on the other side of the street.
And then when you do learn what's there, you also have an opportunity to assess your own talent internally who could best take advantage of that, right? So you can go, okay, I see opportunity on this horizon right now. Who internally could spearhead this, is bleeding from the neck about this, really wants to solve it, or can see a path forward in a way perhaps that the rest of us can't.
Yeah, and that great comment points to 2 or 3 of the newer best practices for innovation. Things are different. So one of the big ones is we always thought of innovation as a creation function. It was the R&D group. It was the entering new markets, doing things that involved using the resources we have as a big organization that the little guys don't. That's our competitive.
But they're all typically then in the old model, right? In thinking about it, they're off on an island somewhere, right? They're in a quiet innovation space. They're not getting gobbled up or bothered by the big boys, right?
Well, and it's because, as we know from open innovation work, and Hank Chesbrough is really the pioneer there, very valuable set of books and articles and stuff. We may have 100,000 of the most brilliant people in the world, but the very, very most brilliant people are most likely to be the 10 in the other 7 billion who aren't inside our shop. Right? Mm-hmm. So how do we get access to them? And a lot of that question has been answered through internet communication. I mean, we have
at open innovation as a genre, right? That we can look outside of the organization. And you talk about the blurring of the walls, right? Softening walls.
Open innovation doesn't work well if your open innovation strategies, I want to have 17 people each going to 12 conferences a year, when you can go online and you can look at what the whole world is doing in a sector. Now, of course, excluding certain areas that you can have good protocols to go and examine. But what you see with innovation is a matching function instead of as a creation function.
Wait, just say that again. Innovation as a matching function rather than a creation function. What does that mean?
So what I want my innovation leaders to do is not set up the lab and be the first to invent something. What I want them to do is have good headlights and understand who out there is already 3 steps ahead and how we can pull them in or get value from them without having to create things. I don't want my innovation team all the time to be saying, I have to scout new employees and we're going to be the difference engine. I want them to say, well, who else in this firm already has an answer? Great.
Wait, can I push back on that for a heartbeat? So if we're always the organization that's looking for the 3 cool people who are in the other place, how do we ever wind up being the place that attracts the 3 cool people who want to be there at the beginning?
Well, one of the things that a lot of us have learned is people who are cool when they're not at corporate headquarters become less cool when we own them.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. And this gets to a parallel issue. We've just been talking a little bit about innovation as a matching function instead of a creation function, and there's much more to say about that. But what does the innovation team look like ideally? The first fallacy, and I was talking to a guy, I think at Deutsche Telekom 15 years ago, very early formal innovation work they were doing. And he told me this beautiful German accent. You have to understand, we don't look at innovation to be like a crazy circus. That's not our approach. I'm like, yeah, I know a lot of people, especially bigger companies going to the Valley, get some craziness, right, that they're going to try to inject. The biggest mistake in terms of the innovation team is you get the most innovative people you can find and you put them on the team. That almost never works. Really, you need a distribution. You need, if your team is 5 to 10 people, you need 1 or 2 people who are the best ideators. You say, here's the market challenge we're trying to get. And they immediately start saying, oh, how about this? How about that? How about this? How about that? And they're good. They're interesting and good ideas. But then you also need folks who aren't thinking about creating the solution. They're thinking about who are the people they can find who already have interesting, good solutions. So they're the ones who you say, hey, here's this great challenge we have. Like, you should call Bob. You should call Susan. You should call Peter. And I think there's a guy in Switzerland who's on this. So now that's helpful. And those people, that's an external version of that. The internal version is equally important. The team in Trenton, New Jersey is thinking about this. Nobody knows it. I have this fella who was recently brought into the research lab, but he was just working in this space for NESC. So you're looking for that kind of informal company knowledge and connectivity. That kind of connector is super important.
Gosh, it feels like trying to find a needle in a haystack for something.
Yeah. Yes, but one of the drivers there is how many of these people should be external, who you're bringing in. How many should be full-time? How many should be part-time? Pull versus push. I mean, this idea of matching, to get back to that, if you have a company of even 500 people, there's someone in that group of 500. And there are probably 5 people in that group of 500 who say, man, I love what we do. I love the environment. I got to do something more creative, or I have to do something more people. But you don't know that's what they're thinking necessarily. How do you map that out? These various technologies, including something like Microsoft backend analytics, can generate, first of all, social networking maps inside your company.
Uh-huh.
And you can say, well, this person is more connected to people. If you're looking at patents, and patents are a blunt instrument, I get a lot to say about why counting patents is not necessarily a good idea. But if we say, look, we value patents, that's a sign to us of building value over time. I can talk about the people who have the most patents, but I can also search, I can do that social network analysis and do a quick search that says, who are the people who spend the most time emailing with people with the most patents, but don't have patents themselves?
Oh, that's really interesting. So you could actually track that.
Exactly.
So like that implies that the folks in the corporate directory have like a little dash next to their name that says, I have a corporate patent, right? On some level.
If these are patents that aren't things they've done in the weekend in their own lab at home, you already know who's getting the patent because you're sharing it with them, you're supporting their work in some way. But what we tend to not ask for is, okay, who unites them, who brings them together, who buys them lunch, who's sending them the most email? Because this is the coach rather than the athlete. And what's great about, I mean, if you follow boxing, what's great about Custom Auto isn't that he was a better boxer than Muhammad Ali, because good Lord, he wasn't. That would be an unfair match. But it was that he really helped shape Ali at a critical point. And then you'd say, wow, if there's anyone who 15 years later is going to start working with Mike Tyson, it's probably the best coach in the world, son of a gun. When Ali was still fighting, Tyson was a 13-year-old living in Custom Auto's house, right? So that's powerful. It's the coach whose name you don't know unless you really look more closely than most of us can. But the systems are picking that up and identify who the connectors are. And there was a project we worked on. We made a match between Microsoft and the consulting firm Genpact. So Microsoft has all these back-end data collectors that they don't use generally because the potential of people feeling like it violates their privacy. There's a social contract, but it answers a lot of questions that they're probably spending $1 billion a year on by not consulting that and using consultants and burning a lot of people's time. So questions like, who's the ideal team to work on this project in this place, in this manner? We know what everyone is doing and saying in email. We know who they're talking to, how often, under what circumstances. We can actually answer that question brilliantly, and they seldom do that even internally. So they spend a tremendous amount of money building a system that does it, and eventually this will be something we become comfortable with the right safeguards around it. So you have those tools,
So just as we're hitting the end of our time together, what's the big takeaway you think when we're looking at these rules, Peter, the old rules and the new rules of innovation? So we can't completely de-risk, right? That's a given. What else what is our big takeaways? We're looking at it's pretty much still the beginning of the year. We're looking at our innovation portfolio for the year. How do we run these rules kind of through the landscape as it exists right now?
Number one, lower the cost of failure in terms of time, money, risk to your reputation and customer relationship.
Okay.
And political cost to folks inside your organization. And the research we've been doing for all these years, we've got short documents that are toolkits for how to do any and all of those. But have that front of mind. If you do nothing more, then think about that explicitly anytime you're making an investment in something new or in a fundamental change. That's really helpful because you'll be doing a lot more short cycle experiments and learning a lot more and then being able to deploy it a lot faster.
So agile sprints, fast MVPs, prototyping really quickly, just to prove the concept even.
Exactly.
Yep.
But resist falling into the channels that already exist in terms of your habits. I was in a giant auditorium with one of the giant big name old time consulting firms. And it was their version of design thinking. They were going to introduce it across this big organization. And just knowing it's like their brand and design thinking, oh, this is not going to end well.
This is not going to go well.
And this was on a big university campus around the corner from a train station, public transit station. And I thought, great, of course, what they're going to do. How do you make it work with these giant, with 50 groups of 5 people each trying to do this? Well, we're going to cook up what we need to prototype. And we're going to do a stalking horse, and then we're going to go to the train station or go interview kids or make a paper mache version of this and see who wants it. They didn't do that. They did the PowerPoint and they talked to us, and then they had us try to pitch to each other. It's like, we aren't real customers. It's ridiculous. You didn't have that fast iteration cycle. In my opinion, the core of design thinking is put something in the market, which means you go and you bring it to a real environment, to real customers, and you say, how would you use this? And they say, this sucks. I mean, it doesn't even have a handle. Oh, okay. You run back, put a handle on it.
Right.
What else did we hear? What else did we learn? Now bring it back. This is that iterative process, very low cost of failure, but real in-market experiment. And that's especially good at doing time and money. It's good about protecting relationship because you're doing it one at a time, though there are drawbacks to that.
Yeah. And for all you dress designers out there, pockets. That's all we're asking for. Put a pocket in it. That's all. It's so easy. Please.
I love
Peter, if people want to learn more about the ILO, the Institute for Innovation at Large Organizations, where can we point them?
So our website is ILO Institute, but we have a kind of, we think of ourselves as a community first and foremost. And the best way for people to engage is to cultivate a relationship with you, cultivate a relationship with me, ask people who you respect who are doing this kind of work, whose advice they take and what communities they value.
Fantastic. Peter Temes, thank you so much for joining me on the Innovation Storyteller Show. This is the first of several installments of our one-on-ones with Peter, playing co-host, talking about the issues that matter most to innovation leaders around the country and around the world. Please join us, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the show and give us your comments and feedback. We want to cover the topics that matter most to you. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next one.
My pleasure. Thank you.